We actually need to do the opposite, where we tear down the rules like wholesale, because a lot of those rules get into so much specifics that it hinders innovation. You can either decide to standardize everything or you can innovate against everything, but you can't do both at the same time.
So I'm here at World Congress in Nashville, Tennessee with Cameron Holt. And we have the privilege of being able to interview him here and talk to him about a recent article that he wrote for Contract Management Magazine, which appeared in the December issue. I think it's a great article, and I would refer all of you to read it. It's really got some deep thinking and will cause you to do some thinking on your own. It's a very dynamic time in the marketplace. There's change accelerating all around us in many dimensions. Technology is accelerating. The business of government is changing. And I wonder if we could start there.
Yeah, it's actually super exciting to be here at the NCMA World Congress in Nashville. And, you know, we thought we would have a certain number, and we just blew it out of the water. I mean, we got to the point where we're starting to worry about the fire code at the Opryland Hotel, if you could imagine, a football field inside and filling that with people. But that's just indicative that our community in contracting is really starting to come together. Mm. And they're starting to really understand that their role is not administrative. Mm. In fact, that they're uniquely positioned to create change, to create innovation, and really to be more like business leaders, rather than just contracting technicians. And with the explosion, as you said, of all these different contracting strategies, pushing the envelope with innovation, stopping this fear of the DC recrimination culture that is so pervasive and keeps us from moving out and trying new things, even though we might fail.
Yeah.
And this really unhelpful past of not trusting each other and developing relationships of suspicion rather than relationships of partnerships. Mm-hmm. And I frankly can't think of a more important time in our nation's history for us to come together. And it may sound like contracting is just a small piece of that puzzle, but it's a very important piece, I believe.
Yeah, so, and I think maybe you can elaborate on that. It's partly because it brings the whole of the American economy to play in the international competition that we're in right now.
Yeah, I've made no secret of this, as you know, Tim. You know, I've been speaking very candidly for the past 5 years, even while I was still in uniform leading Air Force contracting. And the reason why I was so candid about this and really, you know, asking people to wake up is because we are in the midst of what I call a silent war. And it's not just starting. I would say that the Chinese Communist Party has been, in a very focused way, at war with what America represents and the freedom and the international system, with the rule of law respected, the sovereignty of nations respected. I believe they have been at war with us since around 1979. You could argue with me about the timing of it, but there's no doubt that they're on their 14th five-year plan. Yeah. And that plan is going very well. They're a very sophisticated adversary. And I'm careful always to talk about the Chinese Communist Party because our grief is not with the people of China. In fact, my heart breaks for them. I don't know how many people know it, but I grew up part of my childhood in Hong Kong before it was returned to China. And even at a young age, I could understand the palpable fear of those people looking at potentially losing their freedom in the future and coming under a communist blanket rule of totalitarianism.
So what do we need to do to better position ourselves in that silent war?
Yeah, so the first thing we need to do is understand the nature of this war. Inside the Pentagon, I was alarmed to realize that most people think about this just in purely 20th century warfare terms. So military and diplomacy. I would say that in World War II, we were very good at using all four instruments of national power, not just military and diplomacy, but also economics and information. The Chinese Communist Party have set their strategy to be weapons of economic coercion and information coercion principally, with military and diplomacy only underwriting those powers.
And that's why it's silent.
And that's why it's silent. But it's pervasive and it's happening all around us. The other thing that we really need to understand is that our own structures, our own way of doing business, our transparency, our openness in our own government functions, and our social fractures are all being intentionally used against us by the Chinese Communist Party. I often refer to this book called Unrestricted Warfare that was written in 1999, and I talk about this in that article that you referenced.
Yeah.
And it was written by 2 Army PLA colonels, and it was a thought piece on how do you take down a large superpower like America to restore China's rightful place as the father of the world. And it doesn't talk about conquest and taking over territory as we might conceive warfare in our own minds in a 20th century context. Although the threat to Taiwan is very real, that's not their end state. They could actually achieve victory in this war without ever moving militarily against Taiwan. So we need to understand the nature of this fight. And instead of walking like lemmings off the cliff, just blindly following, we need to start realizing who we are. We need to start recognizing how valuable this freedom is that we have. What about the unalienable rights that we fought wars over? Is it worthwhile to continue this experiment?
Yeah.
And frankly push back against anybody that tries to divide us?
Yeah. So that's the mission, and that mission is front and center here.
Absolutely.
At NCMA, and through the contracting community, I think there's a lot to be done.
Yeah.
I know you've put yourself into that fight already, and now that you've retired from service, I know you're still engaged in a variety of ways. So what do you think needs to be done within the contracting world?
You know, what I've talked about to this point is very strategic and very high level. Can we do it all from contracting? No, of course not. Not even from acquisition. But we can highlight our leaders in Congress and in the White House and others how we could change it to actually pit our free market economy system against totalitarian rule in a way that is formidable. And ironically, contracting officers are in a unique position with their knowledge to change this. But we have to start taking ownership of it. And so many people in the acquisition team, all of them are important. But the contracting officer is in a unique position because the contracting officer is really the only one that knows what step 4B looks like.
Right.
To turn dollars into mission. And so I want to a little bit incite violence in my own community to say, set aside the DC recrimination culture. Think about the mission. Use your vast expertise no longer just for compliance sake or to keep people out of trouble or out of the Washington Post, but really apply your knowledge to hacking our system that is antiquated. It's a Cold War system. The resourcing system was built in 1961 and it's still being used, and it takes years, and it creates incredible inflexibility.
Are you involved in any of that activity?
I am. I'm on a PPBE reform task force that's sponsored by the American Society of Military Comptrollers. And we're looking at exactly that. And frankly, we're going to recommend bold action be taken. Not for the sake of the bold action, but really to allow more flexibility to make decisions, especially in execution year. You see, technology moves way too fast for the PPBE process to keep up with. And if PEOs don't even have the ability to move money from one program to another during negotiations, we've already lost. The other huge impact is we have such a treasure in this country of innovation. We have startups and technologists that are second to none in the world. Yet China has more access to that technology than our own Department of Defense because of the resourcing system.
So we got to stop that.
So we have to start modernizing Congress's oversight, in my opinion. We got to be careful that we don't lose that oversight. That's their constitutional role. And I'm a strong believer that our Constitution is the right thing. But we do have to start modernizing that so that it's insight and not just yearly oversight. So that we can move money on the fly, but with full knowledge of Congress. And with all of their tools to oversee us when they're not happy with the direction that things are going. Right. So there's many analogies of that, and I would ask our contracting officers to really start gaining in business acumen about how do free markets work? How do small businesses get funding? What are funding rounds all about? Yeah. What about equity markets and debt and capital and cash flow and balance sheets and income statements and cash flow? We typically don't teach our contracting officers this. We teach them government business. Right. And we say you should have 24 business hours of education. Yeah. But Tim, our system is misaligned. Between industry and government, the incentives are actually inverted from each other. And while industry feels like sometimes they have to apologize for going after their cash flow objectives and their operating margin objectives and return on invested capital objectives, the government side is looking at that and saying, well, you've got to pay attention to cost, schedule, and performance and what we've asked you to do and stop playing hide and go seek with the facts. Yeah. Those two have become at odds and at loggerheads. When I believe having a knowledge of both sides puts the contracting community in a very unique position to align the incentives.
Yeah, that's always key, right?
To look at the proxy statement of a publicly held corporation, which has all the incentives for the CEO and all the named officers of a company, which, by the way, get flowed down to a company at every level, and align them directly with, say, an award fee plan. We also have to think very differently about profit, and I'll explain that. The business model in defense, with so few large prime capable contractors left, has become extraordinarily unhelpful and frankly exactly opposite what we need to do in this national defense strategy with China. I mentioned all four instruments of national power, but make no mistake, the defense instrument, or the military instrument, underwrites all the other powers. Without it being strong, deterrence fails. And so how do we move faster in technology generations than China can keep up with? And I would argue if we flip the business model, we can get there.
So what about the business innovations? Those are the things I think you've mostly focused on in your time, is creating the incentives for people to innovate using whatever authorities they now have across the board, which are many in addition to the FAR, and folks who will say that you can do anything with the FAR, but actually maybe not in the same way or as fast.
Yeah, so my opinion of that is all the tools, use them all. And because the tools are not the end. It's not an end unto itself. I hear lots of arguments about, well, we should do all OTs, or we should do all FAR, or we should do something completely different. I don't think that matters. I think if we realize that FAR Part 54 was created for our benefit. If you go research the FAR, you'll find out that there is no FAR Part 54, but it's the one I've used my whole career. And what I mean by that is, if it's not specifically prohibited in the rules, then it's allowed. And that unlocks all kinds of possible innovation. The irony of this is that instead of creating more rules and more regulations and pulling authorities up to some heavy breather that can make every decision with great experience, we actually need to do the opposite, where we tear down the rules like wholesale. Because a lot of those rules, some are helpful, obviously, but a lot of those rules get into so much specifics that it hinders innovation. You can either decide to standardize everything or you can innovate against everything, but you can't do both at the same time. And our leaders need to be savvy about that. But I'll sum up your point in kind of one quick story that involves my last meeting with the House Armed Services Committee and Senate Armed Services Committee staffs before I left the Air Force. And they asked me, they said, Cameron, should we renew the Commercial Solutions Opening Authority? And I thought about it for a second, and then I answered them directly, and I said, yes, you should. Now, I would get rid of the high-level approval authorities that you've inserted into the law at $100 million, because frankly, if it's another transaction that results from a CSO, that's already required. So get rid of all that bureaucracy, because the fact of the matter is you can do it other ways. And then I told them, although I do believe you should renew it, I'm going to tell you a little secret. And I got them leaning forward.
Yeah, what's the secret?
The secret was that if you don't renew the authority, the Air Force will still do it. And they were like, wait a minute, you don't understand, General. And I said, okay, here's what I mean by that. CSO authority didn't give us one authority that we didn't already have.
Right.
And if you take it away, I'll just rename it to something else. We'll do a combined solicitation synopsis under Part 5 of the FAR, followed by a Part 12 commercial contract. And guess what we'll have? A CSO.
Yeah.
So we got to start thinking outside the box, yes, but all tools are on board, and not just the procurement tools, Tim. I'm talking about equity tools and debt tools. Our pricing community, in my view, are ideal for starting to stretch their understanding of how to do debt instruments, how to do equity instruments, because their skill set is already so good in this area. So if I were to expand training for pricing, that's where I would expand it. We have the Office of Strategic Capital now, run by Jason Rathje in the DoD. I love what Heidi Shue is doing in R&E to press the envelope on that. But frankly, we need partnership from the acquisition and sustainment side, beyond just rhetoric. And frankly, it can't just be the R&E side that's doing that.
Right.
So, and then debt instruments. What can these things unlock? Well, they can unlock American capital in a way that is revolutionary. There are some things the government should invest in that are long-term things that can thwart China's efforts to corner the market on rare earths, or corner the market on batteries, or microelectronics, or a variety of other things that are part of their strategy, and that there's no business case for. On the other hand, when there is a business case for something, we should let private sector capital work. In partnership with venture capitalists and private equity firms, we should let them run, because in the private sector, bad ideas get wrung out so much faster than bad ideas in the government. I think it was Reagan that said there's nothing so much like immortality on earth than a government program. And that's right. And frankly, we can't afford to have B-52s around for 100 years or be putting new wings on an A-10 for crying out loud. We need that money to be reinvested in the next generation of technology so that we can move faster than the Chinese.
I see some of that happening thanks to you.
Well, thank you.
I feel like you've instigated a revolution of sorts within the workforce.
Yeah, I love our workforce. I mean, I love them. And I know them, I feel like I know them in ways that go beyond even their name. But I've seen them eyeball to eyeball. While I was in the Air Force, I traveled all around, and I would speak to groups of 2 or groups of 1,000. And it's really that personal connection in leadership, not email, that's going to get us there, where they really understand what we're saying. And frankly, I would say to leaders of the future, don't use your rank and your power and your authority to bring credit to yourself. Don't worry so much about whether you'll get that next promotion. Use your power and authority to be a blast shield to your folks, a filter
like
through
you were
which no silliness
in
can
your
get
time.
through.
Yeah, exactly.
So anyway.
So the incentives are not necessarily set up to support that behavior, but I think people like you and others have leaned into that need, and I really do think you've made a tremendous difference.
Well, thank you, Tim. If I could, let me close by giving you one possible example of how to flip the business model that I think doesn't require any statutory change at all.
Okay.
So the government owns Section M of a RFP, which is the evaluation criteria for award. We own the requirement. Industry is in a place now, particularly the large primes, where any new source selection for any significant new capability in any domain, they know they're going to have to try to buy in somehow. They're either through CapEx investments that they don't put in their proposal, or through out and out agreeing that they're going to cover some portion of the development cost on their own.
Which is what you mean by buying in.
That's what's buying in. And from a business perspective, when you understand business, that's like the opposite of what any CFO should be doing. But in the defense market, it actually makes sense. You lose $300 or $500 million today when the dollars are most valuable. That's insanity. And sometimes our companies say, well, we see strategic value in this in the future, and they explain away why they're doing it. But the fact of the matter is, the instant that they do that, they have fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. So they have to calculate how they're going to make back 10 to 20 to 30 times that in the out years when those dollars are less valuable.
And those are all briefings to the board, right?
And
this is what we're going to be able to do.
Those dollars are at risk, and yet they still do that behavior. Yeah. That's how bad our business model is. And so we should not wonder, why do they hold on to this IP vendor lock notion that the commercial technology sector abandoned long ago for speed to market as being the key to long-term profitability? Yeah. And the reason is because they know their neighbors might buy in. Yeah. And they can't afford not to be in that business. Yeah. So what if we started gaining some courage? What if we recognized this and said, okay, we're going to put in Section M that you cannot buy in. We're going to do a cost realism analysis, and if you can't survive the integrated master plan, the integrated master schedule being linked to the basis of estimate, we'll throw you out of that competition. Right. We will throw you out. In addition to that, government contracting officials need to start thinking differently about profit and start thinking about how does this work in the commercial technology marketplace. If we prevent buying in behavior in development and production, okay, that's when you field a weapon system. And on top of that, you allow for incentives that could actually produce very high profit in development and production. We normally think cost type contracting, low profit. What if we flipped the script and said, if you do development and production well in a way that's linked up with cost schedule and performance and cybersecurity robustness and so on, you could possibly achieve profits that rival the private sector technology market in development and production.
Because price wouldn't be tied to cost.
Right. And in the out years, however, we insist that there be competitive aftermarkets for all of the weapon systems that are fielded. So each prime contractor, although they have a potential for making lots of money today, has to be able to field it and pass it on to a completely competitive marketplace after fielding. If we did that, the margins that are currently all in the out years, which basically give rise to B-52s that are around for 100 years, right? And make it impossible for politicians to divest of weapon systems because the companies won't let them. Yeah. If, on the other hand, we said we're shifting that profitability forward into development and production, when the dollars are most valuable, no CFO in their right mind could say that they won't support that. Yeah. And our large, exquisite, capable contractors would be interested in moving through that process quickly and then going right back to develop the next generation of technology. And frankly, if we reduced the 75% of the cost, which is where it is in the aftermarket right now, we would be able to afford to drive money back through. If we flip the script and we go to speed to market, just like the commercial sector has already done in the defense market, we will blow the doors off of China. I have no doubt they would never be able to keep up with such a thing. And when we know we're there, you remember when we unveiled the B-21 not too long ago? Well, what if when we rolled it out of the hangar for the first time for all to see, everybody taking pictures, the videos rolling, speeches being made, what if we flew a prototype of its replacement over the crowd at that immediate instant?
Powerful.
What if that was possible? I believe it is if we flip the script on the business model and we align the incentives and put the true free market economy against what China is doing and see who wins.
Wow.
And I'd like to see what that happens.
Yeah.
And contracting can be right in the middle of that if we
For sure.
expand our thinking.
For sure. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. This has been very helpful, educational. I hope that people were able to keep up with you. You move fast, you talk deep, and so we may have to come back and do a remedial session on this one.
That's all right. I'm on LinkedIn. Let me know if you want me to explain something.
All right. Very good. Thanks again, Cameron.